Hi everyone and welcome to another Korean lesson from Korean Studio. My name is Kim Gi-hwan. Now, when people start learning Korean first time, one of the most common issues that people have is learning the sounds of Korean consonants. And one of the most common issues that people have is differentiating between lightly aspirated consonant sounds such as 기역 and 치읓 and heavily aspirated consonant sounds such as 키읔 and 치읓. So today we're going to explain the subtle differences between these consonants so that you have a clear understanding of how and why these consonant sounds are different. Now, before we get into everything, there are a couple of technical concepts that we need to be aware of to fully appreciate and understand the differences between these consonant sounds. And first of these is the concept of voiced and voiceless consonants. Now, if you are a seasoned language learner, maybe you have been learning languages for many years, then you may be familiar with these concepts. But basically, voiced consonant sounds are produced with vocal cord vibration, whereas voiceless consonant sounds do not involve vocal cord vibration. So in this image, these are what's called vocal cords. Sometimes they're also called vocal folds. And with voiced consonants, they close up and vibrate to produce the sounds. Whereas with voiceless consonants, they open up and don't vibrate when sounds are produced. And English consonants have very distinct voiced and voiceless consonant sounds. The main voiced sounds relevant to this lesson are G, D, B, and J sounds. And if we make these consonant sounds, we should be able to feel the vocal cords closing and vibrating as we make the sounds. So with G, it's G, G. Now that's obviously quite exaggerated, but as you try to say the G sound, as you say G, you should feel the vocal cords closing and vibrating. So when we say go, go, initially it closes and vibrates. And in terms of voiceless consonants, we have K, T, P, and CH sounds. And these sounds are produced with no vocal cord vibration. So as you try to say the K sound, ka, 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 the vocal cords stay open and they don't vibrate. But what you do feel in your throat is a buildup of air, which is then expelled as you produce the sound. And this is what we call aspiration, and we'll talk more about this a little later. So if we put these sounds on a spectrum of voiced and voiceless sounds, they will be positioned at opposite ends, with G, D, B, and J sounds at voiced end, and K, T, P, and CH sounds at voiceless ends. Now, the second important concept with consonant sound production is aspiration. Aspiration is to do with the amount of air that's expelled as the sound is produced. Generally speaking, voice sounds are rarely aspirated. And this is largely because these sounds are produced with the vocal cords closing, which prevents air passing through. On the other hand, with voiceless consonants, aspiration is more common as the sound is produced with the vocal cords opening up. And in this spectrum of voiced and voiceless consonants, the voiced consonant sounds are produced with little to no aspiration. However, voiceless consonant sounds are generally made with aspiration, with some sounds having more aspiration than others. So if you put your hand in front of your mouth like this, and say the word bay, you should feel little to no air on your hand. So it's bay, bay, bay. On the other hand, if you do the same thing and say the word pay with a P sound, then you will feel heavy aspiration, a big puff of air on your hand as you say the word. So it's pay, pay, pay. So that's a key contrast between voice sounds and voiceless sounds. Now, four Korean consonants, which we think of as being similar to G, D, B, and J, are 기역, 디귿, 비읍, and 지읒. However, as you may know already, there is a subtle difference between the English and Korean consonants. And it's all to do with differences in vocal cord vibration and level of aspiration. These Korean consonants are all voiceless sounds. So the vocal cords stay open and there is no vocal cord vibration. However, these sounds are produced with light aspiration. And this light aspiration is what makes these consonants sound similar to K, T, P, and CH sounds, but not exactly the same. Listen to the contrast between voiced English consonants and the voiceless Korean consonants with light aspiration. Go, go. 고, 고. do, do. 두, 두. 바, 바. 바, 바. 조, 조. 조, 조. Okay, so hopefully you were able to hear the lightly aspirated Korean consonant sounds, which give them a hint of K, T, P, and CH sounds. However, in Korean, we also have the consonants kiuk, tiut, piup, and chiut. And these sounds are all voiceless and heavily aspirated. And technically, these consonants involve more aspiration than the English K, T, P, and CH sounds, but the level of difference is quite minimal, so I think it's totally fine to think of them as being pretty much the same. Now, listen to the following pair of syllables that use voiceless, lightly aspirated sounds and voiceless, heavily aspirated sounds. 가, 가. 카, 카. 다, 다. 타, 타. 파, 파. 파, 파. 차, 차. 차, 차. The contrast between these consonants is where most people have difficulty with, but at this stage, I think it's the most important thing right now is to understand what these differences are. And the difference is to do with level of aspiration. With one set, they are lightly aspirated, and with the other set, they are heavily aspirated. And I've had so many messages from people on social media about the difficulty they have in differentiating these consonant sounds. But what I would advise is, as I mentioned, at this stage, it's about understanding the differences, and what I would say moving forward is to trust the process. And that process is about developing familiarity with the sounds of Korean. And that will happen through continuous listening of Korean and continuous practice of trying to speak and trying to produce these sounds correctly. So you're at the first stage of that process, and just trust the process and move forward. And in the long run, I'm sure it's not going to be such an issue differentiating the sounds, as no Korean really has any problem differentiating the sounds, but obviously as a beginner learner, it can be a little problematic. Now, one other point to note is that the consonants 기역, 디귿, 비읍, and 치읓 can become voiced G, D, B, and J sounds when they come after voice sounds in Korean. And this pattern happens when these consonants come after vowels, which are always voice sounds, and the consonants 미음, 니은, 이응, and 리을. And the change in consonant sound happens because as we start to produce the voiceless consonant sound, it catches the vocal cord vibration created by the previous sound. So they become voice sounds. So when 기역, 디귿, 비읍, and 치읓 are used in word initial syllables, they are lightly aspirated, voiceless sounds. But after voice sounds, they become voiced consonant sounds, similar to the English consonants. Now listen to the following pair of words and listen carefully to how the consonant in the second syllable in the second word becomes a voice sound. 기, 기. 사기, 사기. 다, 다. 말다, 말다. 부, 부. 공부, 공부. 제, 제. 인제, 인제. So hopefully you were able to hear the differences. So when 기역, 디귿, 비읍, and 치읓 are used in word initial syllables, they are pronounced as voiceless, lightly aspirated sounds. But when they come after voice sounds, they become voiced G, D, B, and J sounds, as they catch the vocal cord vibration created by the previous sound. Okay, so to sum up, the key differences in sound production is all to do with whether the consonant is a voiced or voiceless sound and the level of aspiration. However, all Korean consonants are voiceless sounds, and the differences between them are all to do with level of aspiration. And one other thing we learn is that the voiceless aspirated sounds can become voiced English consonant sounds when they come after voice sounds, such as vowels and certain other letters. Now, being able to produce these sounds correctly and being able to differentiate the sounds when you listen to Korean can be quite tricky. But to be able to do so, I think the first step is to first have that understanding of the differences between these consonants. And as you continue to listen to more Korean and as you continue to practice speaking Korean, trying to produce these sounds correctly, in the long run, I don't think it will be such a big problem. So as mentioned already, believe in the process and keep doing these things, and you will eventually be able to say these consonants correctly and be able to differentiate the sounds much more easily. Okay, so that's it for today's lesson, and I look forward to seeing you soon again. Bye-bye.